The polished mahogany doors of the courtroom swung shut, sealing Hannah Reed in a world of cold judgment. Every whisper felt like a physical blow, every stare a verdict already passed. She was 26 years old, 7 months pregnant, and utterly alone. Across the room, the family of the man she loved, the man whose child she carried, watched her with the predatory stillness of wolves. They saw a schemer, a tramp, a gold digger trying to claw her way into their dynasty. But they didn't see the tear-stained letters she kept, or the future he had promised her in the dead of night. They didn't know that in a few short hours, the man at the center of it all would be dead, and a secret he took to his grave was about to change everything. The air in courtroom 4B of the New Haven City Superior Court was thick with the scent of old paper and expensive perfume. It was a suffocating combination, much like the situation Hannah Reed found herself in. She sat at a simple plaintiff's table, her hands resting protectively on the pronounced curve of her belly. The worn fabric of her maternity dress felt coarse against her skin, a stark contrast to the tailored silk and cashmere suits seated across the aisle. There sat the Blackwood family. Eleanor Blackwood, the matriarch, was a sculpture of ice and diamonds. Her face, a mask of aristocratic disdain, was framed by perfectly coiffed silver hair. Beside her, her son Donovan Blackwood fidgeted with his billion-dollar watch, his expression a cocktail of boredom and contempt. He was the heir apparent to Blackwood Enterprises, a sprawling global conglomerate, and he looked at Hannah as if she were something he'd scraped off his custom-made Italian shoe. They were here because Hannah had dared to claim the unthinkable, that her unborn child was the son of Richard Blackwood, the family patriarch, the brilliant and reclusive CEO Eleanor's husband, and Donovan's father, Miss Reed began Alistair Finch, the Blackwoods' notoriously ruthless attorney. His voice was smooth as venom. You claim to have been in a romantic relationship with my client, Mr. Richard Blackwood, for a period of 11 months. Is that correct? Hannah's own lawyer, a kind but overworked public defender named Robert Peterson, gave her an encouraging nod. Yes, Hannah said, her voice barely a whisper. She cleared her throat. Yes, that's correct. And during this alleged relationship, Finch continued pacing slowly before her. Did you ever once appear with him in public? A restaurant? A charity gala? A simple walk in the park? Richard too. He was a very private person. He said his life was not his own, that he was always under a microscope. Finch scoffed a theatrical sound that echoed in the silent courtroom. A private person. Or a married man who, if your claims have any merit whatsoever, was engaged in a sordid affair with a woman 30 years his junior. A woman who worked as a temp in his company's mailroom. He let the last words hang in the air, weighted with insinuation. The press scribbled furiously. Tears welled in Hannah's eyes, hot and shameful. She wouldn't let them fall. She wouldn't give the Blackwoods the satisfaction. It wasn't sordid, she insisted, her voice gaining a sliver of strength. We were in love. Love. Finch repeated the word as if it were a foreign object in his mouth. And did this love involve financial transactions? Did Mr. Blackwood, a man with a net worth exceeding $10 billion, perhaps give you gifts? An apartment, a car, regular cash deposits. He helped me with my rent. Hannah admitted, her cheeks flushing. He said he didn't want me to worry about anything. He wanted to take care of me. Of us. Her hand instinctively went back to her belly. I see Finch set a triumphant smirk playing on his lips. He turned to the judge. Your Honor, the picture is painfully clear. A young, impressionable woman targets a wealthy, powerful man. She accepts his financial help. And when she finds herself pregnant, she concocts this fantasy of love and a promised future to secure a payday of a lifetime. It is a classic case of extortion. Objection. Mr. Peterson stood, his face flushed with anger. Counsel is testifying and painting a narrative unsupported by facts. Sustained, the judge said, his voice weary. Mr. Finch, stick to the questions. But the damage was done. Hannah could feel the weight of the room's opinion settle on her. They all believed him. Why wouldn't they? It was a story as old as time. The powerful man and the little person. Except they had the story wrong. They didn't know about the nights Richard would sneak away to her tiny apartment, shedding his corporate armor to be just Rick. They didn't know how he'd read poetry to her, his head in her lap, or how he'd press his ear to her stomach and talk to their son, telling him about the stars and the sea. He had promised her everything. He told her his marriage to Eleanor was a business arrangement, a hollow shell for decades. He was planning his exit, untangling his complex financial ties, so he could be free to be with her and their child. Just a little more time, Hannah. He'd pleaded only weeks ago. Donovan is volatile. My board is in a precarious position. I have to do this carefully to protect you from the fallout. They will try to destroy you. And then he had disappeared. 3 weeks ago, he'd stopped calling. His private number was disconnected. When she'd tried to go to his office, security had politely but firmly escorted her out. She was locked out of his life as if she had never been in it. Desperate and terrified, she had done the only thing she could think of. She filed a paternity suit. She didn't want his money. She wanted him to acknowledge his son. The courtroom doors opened abruptly, and a clerk hurried in, handing a note to the bailiff, who in turn passed it to the judge. The judge read the note, his expression shifting from boredom to shock. He looked up, his gaze sweeping over the courtroom before landing on the Blackwood family. Mr. Finch, the judge, said, his voice suddenly grave. I believe you will want to speak with your client. Finch looked confused. He approached the bench and the judge whispered something to him. The blood drained from the lawyer's face. He turned, stumbling back a step, and looked at Eleanor and Donovan. He walked over to their table, leaned down and spoke in a low, urgent tone. Donovan's face went rigid, but it was Eleanor who reacted. A sound escaped her lips, a crack in her icy facade, a brief, sharp gasp of something that might have been pain. She stood up. Her composure shattered and pointed a trembling, diamond-clad finger at Hannah. You, she hissed, her voice a venomous whisper that carried across the courtroom. You did this. Confusion rippled through the gallery. What was happening? The judge banged his gavel. Order. This court is in recess. But no one was listening. Mr. Peterson rushed to Hannah's side. What is going on? He asked. It was then that Donovan, his face pale and his eyes blazing with a strange mixture of grief and fury, finally spoke, his voice loud enough for the entire room to hear. He's dead, Donovan announced, his voice cracking. My father is dead. Richard Blackwood suffered a massive coronary an hour ago. He's gone. The world tilted on its axis. Hannah's breath caught in her throat. A roaring sound filled her ears. Dead Richard. Numb. It wasn't possible. He was planning their future. He was coming for her. He had promised. The courtroom erupted into chaos. Reporters were shouting, running for the doors. Eleanor Blackwood finally collapsed into her chair, a single perfect tear tracing a path down her cheek. Donovan stared at Hannah, his look of contempt now curdled into pure, unadulterated hatred. Hannah didn't see any of it. Her vision tunneled until the only thing she could see was the empty space where Richard should have been. The man who was her entire world was gone. And in his place was only silence, a vast, terrifying emptiness. She was no longer a secret lover fighting for recognition. She was the pregnant mistress of a dead billionaire. And she was utterly, hopelessly alone. The first sob tore from her chest, a raw, ragged sound of a heart breaking in the cold, uncaring glare of justice. The week that followed Richard's death was a blur of gray. The world outside Hannah's small, fourth-floor walk-up apartment in a less than fashionable part of New Haven City seemed to explode with the news. Billionaire CEO Richard Blackwood dead at 58. A titan of industry falls. Blackwood dynasty in mourning. Every news channel, every website, every paper was plastered with his face, the official corporate headshot. The serious, powerful man she barely recognized. The world mourned the CEO. Hannah mourned Rick. The paternity suit was immediately dismissed. With Richard dead, it seemed the Blackwoods had gotten their wish. Hannah Reed and her inconvenient child were now just a footnote, a sordid little rumor that would be swept away with the tide of glowing obituaries and legacy-building press releases. Mr. Peterson had called his voice full of genuine sympathy. He told her that legally, their options were now severely limited. They would need to prove paternity posthumously, a grueling, expensive process the Blackwoods would fight with every resource at their disposal. Hannah spent her days in a state of suspended animation. She would sit by the window, watching the rain trace paths down the grimy glass, her hands resting on her belly, where their son kicked and turned, oblivious to the fact that his father was gone. The apartment, once their secret sanctuary, now felt like a tomb. Every object held a memory, a ghost of Richard's presence. The worn copy of Walt Whitman's Leaves of Grass he'd left on her nightstand. The expensive bottle of scotch in her kitchen cabinet that he'd sipped from while he cooked for her. The soft cashmere sweater draped over a chair that still held his scent. She remembered their last night together just before he had vanished from her life. He had been more tense than usual, his eyes shadowed with a worry he wouldn't name. He held her close, his hand splayed over her stomach. "I'm setting things in motion, Hannah," he'd said, his voice a low rumble against her ear. "It's going to be loud, messy. When it happens, you need to trust me. No matter what you hear, no matter what it looks like, know that everything I'm doing is for you and for our boy. To protect you. Protect me from what, Rick?" she had asked, a knot of fear tightening in her chest. He had just kissed her forehead. "From them, from my world. It's a gilded cage, my love, and the bars are sharper than they look." She hadn't understood then. She thought he meant the divorce, the media frenzy. Now she wondered if he'd had a premonition. Had he known his heart was failing? Had he been trying to warn her? The thought was an agony twisting the knife of grief already lodged in her heart. He hadn't abandoned her. He had been trying to protect her, and he had run out of time. Meanwhile, the Blackwood family presented a united front of dignified grief to the world. The funeral was an opulent, state-like affair, broadcast on national television. Heads of state rival billionaires and celebrities flocked to pay their respects. Hannah watched snippets of it on her small television, a voyeur to the mourning of the man she loved. She saw Eleanor, a grieving widow in black lace, supported by her son Donovan, who had seamlessly stepped into the role of the bereaved heir, delivering a powerful eulogy about his father's vision and legacy. There was no mention of love, only of power strategy and success. A few days after the funeral, a registered letter arrived. It was crisp, expensive stationery, bearing the logo of a prestigious law firm she didn't recognize, Whitman, Price and Sterling. Her heart pounded as she tore it open. It was not a threat. It was not a cease and desist. It was a formal summons. Miss Hannah Reed, it read. You are hereby requested to attend the reading of a private testament and final directive of the late Mr. Richard T. Blackwood. The reading will take place at our offices on Friday, September 5th at 10:00 a.m. sharp. Your presence is not optional. It is a required stipulation of the document in question. Hannah's hands trembled. A private testament, a final directive. What could it possibly mean Richard had a will? A very famous one that left his entire estate to his wife and son, solidifying the family dynasty. It had been reported on extensively. This had to be something else. She called Mr. Peterson, her voice shaking, as she read him the letter. There was a long silence on the other end of the line. Hannah, he said finally, a note of wonder in his voice. I've heard whispers about this firm. They are the best of the best. They don't handle standard estates. They specialize in delicate and complex legacy planning for the ultra-wealthy. This isn't his public will. This is something else entirely. What should I do? She asked. You'll go, he said firmly. And I'm coming with you. Whatever this is, Richard set it in motion. His last words to you were, trust me. It's time to see what he meant. The offices of Whitman, Price and Sterling were on the 80th floor of the city's newest skyscraper, a needle of glass and steel that pierced the clouds. As Hannah and Mr. Peterson stepped out of the private elevator, they entered a world of hushed, quiet modern art and panoramic views of New Haven City. It was Richard's world. A severe-looking woman led them down a corridor to a large boardroom. The Blackwoods were already there. Eleanor and Donovan were seated at one end of a massive obsidian table, flanked by their lawyer, Alistair Finch. When they saw Hannah, their faces hardened into masks of pure loathing. What is the meaning of this? Donovan demanded, rising from his seat. What is she doing here? This is a private family matter. A calm, authoritative man at the head of the table, presumably a senior partner at the firm, held up a hand. Please, Mr. Blackwood, be seated. My name is Arthur Whitman. My firm was retained by your father for a very specific, very private purpose. Miss Reed's presence, as stated in our letter, is a non-negotiable requirement stipulated by your father himself. Donovan sank back into his chair, seething. Eleanor simply stared at Hannah, her eyes like chips of ice. Mr. Whitman cleared his throat and opened a thick, leather-bound portfolio in front of him. We are here today to unseal and read the last will and testament of Richard T. Blackwood, dated 3 weeks prior to his passing. This document, which I can assure you is ironclad and has been authenticated by multiple sources, supersedes any and all previous wills, including the one filed with Mr. Finch's office. Alistair Finch shot up from his seat. That's impossible. The family's will is notarized and has been in my firm's possession for a decade, and now it is a historical document of no legal standing. Mr. Whitman replied coolly, not even looking up. Mr. Blackwood was very clear and very thorough. He called this document his true legacy. Shall we begin? The room was silent, thick with a tension so palpable Hannah could taste it. She sat beside Mr. Peterson, her heart hammering against her ribs. 3 weeks ago. Richard had written this right after he disappeared from her life, right after he told her to trust him. This was it. This was his final message, not just to his family, but to her. The echoes of his promises were about to become real, and Hannah had a feeling the gilded cage he'd spoken of was about to be rattled to its very foundations. Arthur Whitman adjusted his spectacles, the fluorescent lights of the boardroom glinting off the lenses. The room was so quiet that the rustle of the thick parchment paper sounded like a thunderclap. Hannah's hands were clammy, her knuckles white as she gripped them in her lap. Across the table, Donovan Blackwood was vibrating with barely suppressed rage, while his mother Eleanor remained unnervingly still, her gaze fixed on Whitman, her face an unreadable marble mask. "I, Richard Thomas Blackwood," Whitman began, his voice a steady, dispassionate monotone, "being of sound mind and body, do hereby declare this to be my last will and testament, revoking all prior wills and codicils made by me." He paused, letting the finality of the words settle. Let's dispense with the usual bequests of personal effects, which are detailed in an appendix. I wish to proceed to the primary assets of my estate, namely my controlling interest in Blackwood Enterprises and my liquid assets held in various trusts. Donovan leaned forward, a hungry, expectant look in his eyes. This was the moment he had been groomed for his entire life. To my son, Donovan. Michael Blackwood Whitman read, "I leave my collection of vintage automobiles and my property in Aspen, Colorado." The silence that followed was deafening. Donovan's face contorted, first in confusion, then in disbelief. "What, the cars? That's it," he stammered, looking at his lawyer Alistair Finch, who seemed equally stunned. Whitman continued, his tone unchanged. "I do this not out of a lack of affection, but out of a deep and profound disappointment. You have come to view your position in my company not as a responsibility, but as a birthright. You value the symbols of success far more than the hard work required to achieve it. It is my sincerest hope that this reduction in your expectations will afford you the opportunity to build a legacy of your own, rather than simply squandering mine." The words were a brutal, posthumous slap in the face. Donovan's face went from pale to a deep, blotchy red. The old bastard," he sputtered, half rising from his chair before Finch pulled him back down. Eleanor's composure finally cracked. "And what of me, Mr. Whitman?" she demanded, her voice tight and strained. His wife of 35 years. Whitman turned a page. "To my wife, Eleanor Vance Blackwood. I leave the New Haven City penthouse apartment, the Hamptons estate, and a lifetime annuity of $5 million per year to be managed by an independent trustee. $5 million a year was a fortune to most, but Hannah knew it was a pittance compared to the Blackwood lifestyle. It was an allowance, a gilded leash. The annuity, Whitman added, is contingent upon your non-interference in the future management of Blackwood Enterprises. Any attempt to legally challenge this will, or to disrupt the company's new leadership, will result in the immediate and permanent termination of said annuity." Eleanor's mask of control crumbled into raw fury. "New leadership? What new leadership? The company belongs to us. It belongs to my son." "Not anymore, Mrs. Blackwood," Whitman said calmly. He looked down at this document, and for the first time his eyes flickered towards Hannah. She felt a jolt, a current of nervous energy that made the baby inside her stir. "The entirety of my remaining estate," Whitman announced, his voice ringing with authority, "including my 51% controlling stake in Blackwood Enterprises, all associated voting rights, and all my liquid assets estimated at a value of approximately $9.7 billion are to be placed into a newly formed, irrevocable trust. This trust shall be known as the Phoenix Legacy Trust. The room was spinning. Hannah gripped the edge of the table to steady herself. Phoenix. That was the name Richard had wanted for their son. The sole beneficiary of the Phoenix Legacy Trust, Whitman continued his words, landing like hammer blows, is the unborn child of Miss Hannah Reed, contingent upon a DNA test confirming my paternity. Said test is to be administered upon the child's birth. I have already provided a genetic sample to this firm, which has been independently cryopreserved to facilitate this. Gasps filled the room. Alistair Finch looked as though he was going to faint. Donovan was on his feet now, his chair scraping violently against the floor. This is insane. He was senile. That woman, she manipulated him, she poisoned him against his own family. Hannah felt faint, her mind unable to process the scale of what was happening. Her son, her baby, was now one of the wealthiest people on the planet. Please, Mr. Blackwood, there is more, Whitman said, his voice firm, cutting through Donovan's tirade. And I suggest you listen very carefully. Donovan stood panting with rage, but he fell silent. The Phoenix Legacy Trust will be administered by a 3-person board of trustees, of which I, Arthur Whitman, will be one. The other 2 will be appointed by my firm. They will oversee the management of Blackwood Enterprises until the beneficiary, the child of Miss Reed, reaches the age of 25. He paused, taking a deep breath before delivering the final devastating blow. During this period of trusteeship, all decisions regarding the running of the company, including the appointment of a new CEO, will require a unanimous vote from the trustees. However, there is one more stipulation. A new seat is to be created on the board of directors of Blackwood Enterprises, effective immediately. This seat, designated as the beneficiary guardian seat, carries with it full voting rights, a board member's salary, and a mandate to ensure the company is run in a manner that will protect the long-term interests of the trust's sole beneficiary. Whitman looked up from the will. He removed his glasses, and for the first time he made direct eye contact with Hannah. His expression was not cold or legal. It was almost kind. This seat, he said, his voice softening slightly, is to be filled by the child's mother and legal guardian. This seat belongs to you, Miss Hannah Reed. The world went white. Hannah heard a roar, a scream of pure animalistic rage. It was Donovan. He lunged across the table, his face a mask of fury, his hands reaching for her. You bitch! I'll kill you! Before he could get close, Mr. Peterson was on his feet, shielding Hannah. 2 security guards who had been standing discreetly by the door moved in with swift, silent efficiency, grabbing Donovan by the arms and restraining him. This is a farce! A joke! Eleanor shrieked, her voice shrill with hysteria. She's a whore from the mailroom! She will not sit on my husband's board! We will fight this! We will drag her name and the name of her bastard child through so much mud she will drown in it. Hannah barely heard them. Her mind was reeling, trying to piece together Richard's plan. This wasn't about money. It was about control. He hadn't just disinherited his family. He had surgically removed them from his life's work. And in their place, he had put her. A temp from the mailroom, his secret love, the mother of his only true heir. He hadn't abandoned her. He hadn't run out of time. This was his plan all along. The ultimate act of protection. He hadn't just given her a shield. He had given her a sword. He had given her his entire kingdom. As the Blackwoods were escorted from the room, still screaming threats and promises of legal Armageddon, Hannah looked at Mr. Peterson, her eyes wide with a mixture of terror and awe. He told me to trust him. She whispered, her hand on her belly. Mr. Peterson placed a steadying hand on her shoulder. He did more than that, Hannah. he said, his voice filled with reverence. He gave you the last word. The reading of the will was not an end, but a declaration of war. The moment the news broke, a media firestorm erupted, and Hannah was at its epicenter. The Blackwoods, true to their word, unleashed a brutal, highly public assault on her character. They painted her as a master manipulator, a siren who had lured a vulnerable, aging man to his ruin. Tabloids were fed a steady stream of fabricated stories and anonymous sources who claimed Hannah was a career gold digger with a checkered past. Her face was everywhere, juxtaposed with screaming headlines. The billion-dollar baby trap, mailroom mistress steals an empire, the seductress who toppled a dynasty. Her quiet, anonymous life was obliterated overnight. Paparazzi camped outside her apartment building, their long lenses like sniper rifles aimed at her windows. She became a prisoner in her own home, the sanctuary Richard had provided now feeling more like a cage than ever. Every time she dared to peek through the blinds, she was met with a sea of flashing cameras. The legal battle was just as ferocious. Alistair Finch filed motion after motion, contesting the will on every conceivable ground. They claimed Richard was not of sound mind, that he was suffering from undiagnosed dementia. They alleged undue influence, claiming Hannah had coerced him, perhaps even drugged him. They demanded access to Richard's private medical records, hoping to find any shred of evidence to support their claims. It was a war of attrition, designed to exhaust Hannah emotionally and financially. But Richard had anticipated this. Arthur Whitman and his firm were a legal fortress. For every motion Finch filed, they produced a counter-motion complete with sworn affidavits from Richard's personal physicians attesting to his perfect mental clarity right up to the day of his death. They produced a video taken the day the will was signed, showing Richard calmly and lucidly explaining his reasoning to Whitman. "My family sees Blackwood Enterprises as a personal bank," Richard said in the video, his face etched with a deep weariness. "They don't care about the employees, the innovation, the legacy. They care about the dividends. I am leaving my company to the only person I know who will see it as a responsibility, not a piggy bank. I am leaving it in the hands of the mother of my son. She has a pure heart, and she will protect his future. She is the only one I trust." The video was a powerful weapon, but the Blackwoods campaign was one of public opinion, not legal fact. They aimed to make Hannah's position on the board untenable to turn the company's shareholders and employees against her before she even set foot in the building. Hannah felt herself buckling under the pressure. She was pregnant, grieving, and now she was being publicly crucified. One evening, as she sat watching another vicious news report about herself, she broke down sobbing into her hands. Mr. Peterson, who now visited her almost daily, sat with her a steady presence in the chaos. "They want you to break Hannah," he said gently. "That's their whole strategy. If you give up your seat on the board, they can petition the court to have a more suitable guardian appointed to represent the trust. They'll put one of their own people in, and they'll be right back in control. You can't let them win." "How can I fight them?" she cried. "I don't know anything about business or boardrooms. They're right, I'm just me, a girl from the mailroom." "You are the mother of Richard Blackwood's son," Mr. Peterson corrected her firmly. "And he chose you for a reason. He believed in you. You need to start believing in yourself." His words struck a chord. Richard had trusted her. He had seen something in her that she couldn't see in herself. She owed it to him and to their son to be the woman he believed her to be. The next day, a package arrived from Arthur Whitman's office. It wasn't a legal document. It was a small, heavy box wrapped in simple brown paper. Inside, nestled on a bed of velvet, was a single ornate, old-fashioned key and a small, sealed envelope with her name on it, written in Richard's familiar, elegant script. Her hands trembled as she opened the letter. My dearest Hannah, if you are reading this, it means the war has begun. I am so sorry to have put you in this position, but it was the only way. The cage I spoke of is guarded by dragons, and now they have turned their fire on you. But I did not leave you defenseless. My family's greatest weakness is their arrogance. They believe they are untouchable. They are wrong. For years, I have watched my son Donovan use the company as his personal slush fund, engaging in activities that are not just unethical, but illegal. I have turned a blind eye, hoping he would mature, but he has only grown more reckless. My wife Eleanor knows everything, and has enabled him so long as her own lifestyle remained secure. They think their secrets are buried. But I have the map. This key opens a private security box at the New Haven City Central Bank. The box is registered under the name David Thoreau, a name they will not know. Inside, you will find everything you need. You will find the truth. Use it not for revenge, my love, but for protection. Use it to secure our son's legacy and to cleanse the company I built. Be strong. Be the woman I know you are. Forever yours, Rick. Hannah stared at the letter, her heart pounding with a new fierce energy. Grief and fear were replaced by a cold, clear resolve. This was Richard's final gift. Not money, not power, but a weapon. He had known his family would attack her, and he had left her the means to fight back. He had shown her where the dragons kept their hoard of secrets, and he had just handed her the key to the treasure chest. The next morning, Hannah Reed walked out of her apartment building for the first time in weeks. Shielding her face from the cacophony of flashing cameras with a large pair of sunglasses, she ignored the shouted questions and insults. She was no longer just a victim. She was on a mission. She hailed a taxi, her destination clear in her mind. She was going to the bank. The unseen war was about to get a whole lot more visible. The New Haven City Central Bank was an old institution, a fortress of marble and bronze that exuded an aura of quiet, unassailable power. It was a world away from the screeching tabloids and the frantic energy of the paparazzi that had become Hannah's new reality. Here, money didn't scream. It whispered. Dressed in the most professional-looking maternity dress she owned, Hannah walked through the grand lobby, her heart a frantic drum against her ribs. She felt like an imposter, a little girl playing dress-up in a giant's castle. She presented the key and a copy of Richard's letter to a stern-faced manager who led her down to the vault without a word. The air grew colder as they descended, the silence broken only by the click of their shoes on the polished floor. The manager used his own key in conjunction with hers, and a heavy stainless steel door swung open. He pulled out a long metal box and placed it on a table in a small private viewing room before leaving her in complete solitude. For a moment, Hannah just stared at the box. This was it, the final piece of the puzzle Richard had left for her. Taking a deep breath, she lifted the lid. Inside, there were no jewels, no stacks of cash, no gold bars. It was far more valuable. On top lay another sealed envelope, and beneath it a sleek black external hard drive and a series of ledgers bound in dark green leather. She opened the letter first. Richard's handwriting was a comforting, familiar sight. My Hannah, I hope this finds you well, and that our son is strong and healthy. I wish I could be there to see him born, to hold him to be the father he deserves. I'm writing this because I need you to understand why I did what I did, why I had to push you away. About 6 months ago, I was diagnosed with a severe, inoperable cardiomyopathy. The doctors gave me a year, perhaps less. My heart was quite literally broken. I didn't tell you because I didn't want our last months together to be spent in the shadow of my death. I wanted us to have joy, not sorrow. I wanted the time we had left to be about life, about the new life we were creating. But the diagnosis forced my hand. I knew what would happen when I was gone. Donovan, enabled by his mother, would seize control of the company and run it into the ground. Their greed is a bottomless pit. But more than that, I knew they would see you and our child as the ultimate threat. They wouldn't just fight you in court, Hannah. They are capable of much worse. I couldn't risk leaving you unprotected, so I made a terrible choice. I pushed you away. I cut off all contact to make them believe you meant nothing to me, that you were a passing fancy. I knew it would hurt you, and it was the hardest thing I have ever had to do. I hoped you would file a lawsuit, that you would make a public claim. It sounds cruel, but I needed you to be on their radar in a way that I could control. I needed to set the stage for the will. This box contains what I call my poison pill. It's the antidote to my family's venom. For the past 5 years, I have been secretly documenting Donovan's financial crimes. He thinks he's a genius, but he's just a common thief in a bespoke suit. The ledgers detail a massive fraud scheme he's been running through a subsidiary of Blackwood Enterprises, siphoning millions of dollars into shell corporations in the Cayman Islands. He's been falsifying invoices, creating ghost employees, and cooking the books to hide it all. The hard drive contains copies of everything: bank statements, encrypted emails between him and his co-conspirators, wire transfers, everything an investigator would need to send him to prison for a very long time. I have also included evidence of Eleanor's complicity, proof that she knew what was happening and used the stolen money for her own personal gain. This is your leverage, Hannah. This is your shield and your sword. Do not go to the authorities, not yet. That is the nuclear option. Your battlefield is not the courtroom. It is the boardroom. The board of directors at Blackwood Enterprises is composed of people who respected me, but they fear Donovan. Show them that you are not the tramp the media claims you are. Show them you have the strength to lead. Confront Donovan and Eleanor with this evidence privately. Give them a choice. They can relinquish all claims, resign from their positions, and disappear quietly, or you will release this information to the federal authorities and the press. The choice between a quiet retirement and public disgrace and imprisonment is a simple one, even for them. This is a heavy burden to place on you, my love. I am asking you to walk into a viper's nest. But I know you can do this. You have a strength you don't even recognize. Fight for our son. Build a company he can be proud to inherit. Fulfill the legacy that I was not strong enough to secure in life. My heart may have failed me, but yours, my love, is the strongest I have ever known. All my love for all time. Rick. Tears streamed down Hannah's face, dripping onto the pages of the letter. They were not tears of sadness, but of understanding. A profound, aching clarity washed over her. Every confusing, painful moment of the past month suddenly made sense. His withdrawal wasn't abandonment. It was a strategic retreat. His silence wasn't rejection. It was the creation of a weapon. The paternity suit he'd maneuvered her into filing wasn't a humiliation. It was the first move in his posthumous chess game. He had been playing a long game, a game for the highest stakes, all to protect her and their son. The depth of his love, his foresight, his tragic sacrifice was overwhelming. He had died, but he had left his ghost in the machine, a perfectly executed plan to save them all. She wiped her tears, her grief transmuting into something hard and sharp determination. She looked at the hard drive and the ledgers. The poison pill. Richard had called it that, but she saw it as something else. It was the truth. And the truth she was beginning to understand was the most powerful weapon of all. She carefully packed everything back into the box. As she walked out of the bank, Blinking in the sudden sunlight, she no longer felt like an imposter. The fear was gone, replaced by an icy calm. She knew exactly what she had to do. The Blackwoods had chosen their weapons, lies and intimidation. Richard had just given her a better one. She wasn't just going to survive their war, she was going to win it. The Blackwood Enterprises boardroom was on the top floor of their corporate tower, a cavernous space with a 30-foot-long marble table and floor-to-ceiling windows that offered a godlike view of New Haven City. It was a room designed to intimidate a temple of corporate power where fortunes were made and futures were decided. And it was here that Hannah Reed, 7 months pregnant and armed with a dead man's secrets, had called an emergency meeting of the board. She had arrived early with Mr. Peterson and Arthur Whitman. She took her seat, not at the side, but at the head of the table in the large leather chair that had been Richard's. It was a bold move, and when the other board members began to file in, they took notice. They were mostly older men, titans of industry in their own right, their faces a mixture of curiosity, skepticism, and outright hostility. They had read the papers. They knew her as the mailroom mistress. Finally, Donovan and Eleanor Blackwood arrived, accompanied by Alistair Finch. They stopped dead in the doorway when they saw Hannah in Richard's chair. Donovan's face purpled with rage. "What is the meaning of this?" he snarled, pointing at her. "Get out of my father's chair. It's my chair now, Donovan," Hannah said, her voice quiet, but carrying an unexpected weight of authority that surprised even herself. "As the board representative for the controlling shareholder, this is my rightful place. Please take a seat. We have much to discuss." Her calmness seemed to unnerve him more than any outburst would have. Sputtering, he took a seat with his mother and lawyer flanking him like gargoyles. The meeting began tensely. Arthur Whitman, in his capacity as trustee, formally introduced Hannah to the board. Hannah then stood her hands resting on the back of Richard's chair and addressed the room. "I know what you all think of me," she began, her gaze sweeping across their stony faces. "The media and the Blackwood family have painted a very specific, very ugly picture of who I am. I'm not here today to talk about my relationship with Richard Blackwood. I am here to talk about the future of his company, a future I am now legally and morally obligated to protect on behalf of his son and heir." She spoke for 10 minutes, not about balance sheets or profit margins, but about Richard's original vision for the company. She spoke of the ideals he had shared with her in private, of ethical innovation, employee welfare, and long-term stability over short-term greed. She spoke with a passion and sincerity that slowly began to chip away at the board's icy reserve. She wasn't quoting business journals. She was quoting the founder's soul. Donovan laughed out loud, a harsh braying sound. "Oh, please." Ethical innovation. My father hadn't had an original thought in a decade. He was a tired old man, and you, a conniving little witch, took advantage of him. Board members, I urge you to join me in a vote of no confidence in this guardian. We must petition the courts to have her removed for the good of the company." Hannah let the insult wash over her. She held his gaze, her expression unreadable. "Thank you for your input, Donovan. In fact, your leadership is precisely what I wanted to discuss next." From a briefcase at her feet, she removed one of the green ledgers and the black hard drive, placing them deliberately on the polished marble table. The click of the hard drive against the stone echoed in the silent room. "I have recently come into possession of some of your private business records, Donovan," she said, her voice dropping to a cool, clinical tone. "Specifically records pertaining to the Blackwood Global Logistics subsidiary." The color drained from Donovan's face. Eleanor stiffened beside him. Alistair Finch leaned forward, his eyes wide with alarm. It seems, Hannah continued opening the ledger to a bookmarked page, that this subsidiary has been remarkably profitable despite having very few actual clients. I was particularly interested in the payments made to a series of holding companies in the Cayman Islands, companies like Viridian Assets and Osprey Holdings. It seems they've received payments totaling over $93 million in the last 3 years for consulting services. She looked up, her eyes locking onto Donovan's. The funny thing is, my research shows these companies don't actually exist. They're shell corporations. And all of them trace back to a single anonymous account. Your account, Donovan. A collective gasp went through the room. The other board members stared at Donovan, their expressions shifting from skepticism of Hannah to dawning horror. "These are lies," Donovan choked out, but his voice lacked conviction. He was sweating now, his bravado crumbling. "Is it?" Hannah said softly. She tapped the hard drive. "This drive contains copies of every wire transfer, every falsified invoice, every email you sent, setting up the scheme. It even includes correspondence with your mother discussing how to best invest your stolen funds offshore. It's a very thorough record. I'm sure the SEC and the IRS would find it fascinating reading." It was checkmate. The room was utterly silent. Donovan looked at his mother, his eyes pleading, but Eleanor was staring at the hard drive as if it were a venomous snake, her face a deathly pale. Alistair Finch was frantically whispering to them, but they weren't listening. They were trapped. Hannah let the silence stretch, allowing the full weight of their ruin to settle upon them. Then she laid out her terms. "Here is what is going to happen," she said, her voice now ringing with the absolute authority Richard had known she possessed. "You, Donovan, will tender your immediate resignation from your position as COO and from this board. You, Eleanor, will resign your honorary board seat. You will both issue a joint public statement citing personal reasons and a desire to pursue philanthropic interests. You will relinquish any and all future claims against Mr. Blackwood's estate and against the Phoenix Legacy Trust. You will cease your media campaign against me effective immediately." She paused. "You will do all of this, and in return, this hard drive and these ledgers will remain in a very secure, very private vault. However, should you fail to comply in any way, or if any harm should come to me or my son, a copy of this entire file will be automatically delivered to the U.S. Attorney's Office and every major news outlet in the country. The choice is yours. A quiet, comfortable life of exile, or a very public and lengthy prison sentence." Donovan stared at her. His eyes filled with a new emotion, fear. The arrogant bully was gone, replaced by a terrified man who had just seen the abyss open up beneath him. Eleanor, ever the pragmatist, saw the game was over. She gave a slight, almost imperceptible nod. Hannah looked around the table at the stunned faces of the board members. "Blackwood Enterprises needs to be cleansed," she said. "It needs to return to the principles on which it was founded. I will need your help to do that. Richard Blackwood entrusted his legacy not just to me, but to all of us. I, for one, do not intend to fail him." In the silent, awestruck boardroom high above the city, it was clear that a new power had risen. Hannah Reed, the girl from the mailroom, had not just won the war. She had taken the throne. 6 months later, the world of Hannah Reed was unrecognizable. The winter chill had given way to the first blush of a New Haven city spring, and with it, a new beginning. The day after the explosive board meeting, Donovan and Eleanor Blackwood had vanished from public life. Their resignations were announced in a sterile press release their sudden departure fueling weeks of speculation in the financial papers, but the truth remained a closely guarded secret. The poison pill had worked perfectly. The dragons had been slain not with fire and fury, but with the cold, quiet threat of the truth. Hannah had given birth to a beautiful, healthy baby boy. She named him Phoenix, just as Richard had wished. He had his father's deep blue eyes and a dusting of his own soft brown hair. Holding him in her arms in the quiet of the hospital room, Hannah felt a peace she hadn't known in years. The grief for Richard was still there, a tender ache in her heart, but it was no longer the all-consuming void it had once been. It was now mingled with a profound sense of gratitude and love for the precious life he had given her. The DNA test was a mere formality. One look at her son was all the proof anyone would ever need. Stepping into her role on the board of Blackwood Enterprises was the most intimidating challenge of her life. The initial weeks were a whirlwind of meetings, briefings, and steep learning curves. Some of the old guard on the board were resentful, viewing her as an unqualified usurper. But Hannah did not try to be the CEO Richard was. Instead, she became the guardian he had intended. She listened more than she spoke. She asked the questions no one else dared to ask. She championed the employees, visiting factories and distribution centers, learning the names of the people whose lives depended on the company's success. Her greatest ally was Arthur Whitman, who as a trustee guided her through the labyrinthine complexities of corporate governance. He saw in her not the woman the tabloids had invented, but the person Richard had seen all along, intelligent, empathetic, and possessing an unshakable moral compass. Slowly, painstakingly, she earned the respect of the board, not through aggression or ambition, but through integrity and a fierce dedication to protecting her son's legacy. She moved out of her small apartment and into a secure, comfortable home in a quiet, family-friendly neighborhood, a home bought not with trust money, but with her own board salary. She wanted Phoenix to grow up with green grass and the laughter of other children far from the cold marble towers of the corporate world. The CEO's office at Blackwood Enterprises remained for a time unoccupied. The board under Hannah's and the trustees' guidance conducted a months-long search for a new leader, someone who embodied the principles Richard had espoused. Hannah sat in on the final interviews, her son sleeping soundly in a carrier beside her. Her presence was a silent, constant reminder of what was at stake, not the next quarter's earnings, but the next generation's future. One sunny afternoon, Hannah stood in Richard's old office. She had kept it mostly as he had left it. She ran her hand over his large oak desk, the place where he had built an empire. From this window, she could see the whole of New Haven City sprawling out below. It was a view of immense power, but she saw it differently now. She saw a city full of people, of families, of lives intertwined with the decisions made in this very room. Phoenix cooed in her arms, reaching a small, chubby hand up to touch her face. She looked down at him into the eyes of his father and smiled. "He did all of this for you," she whispered, her voice thick with emotion. "He built a fortress to keep you safe, my sweet boy. And now it's our job to make it a home." The world would always remember Richard Blackwood as a titan of industry, a brilliant, reclusive billionaire. The tabloids might forever whisper the scandalous tale of the mailroom girl who inherited it all. But Hannah knew the real story. It wasn't a story about money or power. It was a love story. A story of a man who, facing his own mortality, had orchestrated a brilliant, desperate gambit to save the two people he loved most. Hannah Reed was no longer the abandoned, crying woman in the courtroom. She was a mother, a guardian, a leader. She had walked through fire and emerged not burned but forged anew. She was the keeper of the Phoenix legacy, and she was ready to watch it rise from the ashes. From the depths of despair in a cold courtroom to the pinnacle of power in a glass tower, Hannah's journey shows us that the truth is often hidden behind headlines and judgment. It's a story about a love so powerful it transcended death itself, and the incredible strength a mother finds to protect her child. Richard Blackwood's final plan wasn't about disowning his family. It was about empowering the woman he truly loved, proving that integrity and courage are worth more than any inheritance. Her story is a powerful reminder that the greatest legacies are not built of wealth, but of love, sacrifice, and the unbreakable will to protect what matters most. If this story of love loss and ultimate triumph moved you, please give this video a like to show your support. Share it with someone who appreciates a story with a powerful message. And don't forget to subscribe to our channel for more real-life dramas that will touch your heart and make you think. Click that notification bell so you never miss a story.